Hey class, welcome back to Electromagnetics. Last lecture we looked at Faraday's law and looked at it in differential form. So today we want to do the same with Amperes law, again taking it to differential form. First, we want to take a quick historical background, as we have been doing up till now, looking at different figures in history that contributed to electromagnetics. So this person, their education, they were self-taught, so they were homeschooled. They worked at the, I don't know how to pronounce this, École Polytechnique, which was in Paris, France. Here is an image of this individual, and you could have guessed who this is from today's lecture. This is André Marie Ampere. So he lived from 1775 to 1836. So what are some notable facts about this gentleman? He formulated the math to explain the Oersted experiment. Remember a couple of lectures back we talked about the Oersted experiment and what that helped us understand about the relationship between electric and magnetic fields. He was actually the first to formulate the existence of what he called the electrodynamic molecule. Later this would be called the electron, so he was the first to formulate the existence of this. And as we all know, he is honored for his contributions by having his name associated as the SI unit for electric current. So when we have current flow, that's measured in amperes, or the abbreviated form of amps, how many amps something is. So this is who that's named after. So as already mentioned, we're going to continue on in part 3. We're looking at Maxwell's equations in differential form. We looked at Faraday's law last time, so this time we want to do the same type of analysis with Ampere's law. So doing so, we'll now take a look at Ampere's law. We recall from before that in integral form we can express this with this equation. And what this tells us is if we have some defined closed path or contour, if we sum up the magnetic field intensity around that contour, again doing the dot product, this is a vector, so it's in the direction of the contour. So we're taking that dot product and multiplying these together and adding them all the way around. That should be equal to the total current flow through the surface that's bounded by this contour. So again, this is our current density. So if we take current density and multiply it times the total area, then that should give us amps. This is because this is amps per meter squared, and this is be an area in meter squared. So normal to that surface, since we're doing the dot product, so any current flowing normal to the surface, that'll contribute. And then we also have the time derivative of the displacement current vector. And so again, this only happens if it's varying with time, that we get some representation here. And again, that's also the vector that's penetrating that same surface bounded by C. So again, this is where this S surface is the surface that's bounded by this contour C. So similar to how we did with Faraday's law, we now want to consider a magnetic field that has only a Y component that is dependent only on its location on the Z-axis and time. So this means that it travels only in the Z direction. And of course, this will be of this form, magnetic field. It'll have a Y component that varies with Z and T. And of course, it's going to be varying back and forth on the Y-axis or in the Y direction. So again, just as we did before, we want to define this rectangular path in the YZ plane that we're going to shrink down infinitesimally small. So again, we'll start at some arbitrary point YZ. We'll vary Y from Y to delta Y and Z from Z to delta Z. So that gives us our length and width of the rectangle is delta Y delta Z, and the ending point of Y plus delta Y, Z plus delta Z. So as we're looking at this, we remember that our magnetic field only has representation in the Y direction, so that would be both of the vertical sides here. When we consider the horizontal directions in the z direction, there will be no contribution from the magnetic field. So those should be 0. So keeping that in mind, let's go ahead and integrate around this loop. So we'll break it up into 4 sections, one for each side. Again, remembering that h sub z is equal to 0. And so when we do that, we can start with our point y, y, z, and we'll go up, varying our y to delta y. So when we do, we just have our y component times the distance traveled, that delta y. When we go across then, we'll go from delta y stays the same, so there's no variation there. We go from z to delta z, but remember there is no delta z, it's equal to 0, so this part falls out. So then as we come down to the other side, our z plus delta z stays constant. We go from y to y plus delta y, and when we do, that'll give us the negative of our direction times that hy component times our length of that distance traveled, again, that vertical side delta y. And then finally coming back to where we started, again, the hz component, because we're only varying in z direction, is equal to 0. So because of that, these 2 horizontal legs of our path again go to 0, and we're left with just these 2 sides. So we can take those results, and that will give us the left side of Ampere's law. So our sum around this contour of the magnetic field dotted with the length vector just gives us hy delta y minus hy times delta y here. And again, these are evaluated at these at z and z plus delta z. Can rearrange this just a bit. The delta y can be brought out, and when we do that, we get this resulting expression here. So now what's left is we need to find the current in the area S. That's S is what's created by that contour C, and we need to consider both the current density and the displacement density with an X component. So when we do the current, the real current, again, that's our integrating across that surface, the current density dotted with the surface vector. When we do that, we will get this Jx component evaluated at y and z times the area of that rectangle delta y delta z. And then we do the same thing for our displacement vector, that second term. It's the time differential of this integral. Well, when we do that, again, we will get this delta, this d sub x in terms of y and z times this area, taking the partial derivative with respect to time. And so when we bring out the delta y delta z's, they're constants, we're left with this remaining term. So now we've got all the components. Now we can put these back into our original Ampere's equation. So this is the left side, the integration or the summation of the magnetic field around our loop. And then this side is the summation of the total current through our surface, both real current and displacement current. So we can rearrange this just a little bit. The delta y's cancel out, and we can bring the delta z over to this side, divide both sides by delta z, and we're left with this equation. So just as before, we note that each side is now in the basic form of the definition of a derivative, the difference between 2 points divided by the distance between them. All that's left then is to shrink these distances to 0. So that's exactly what we'll do. We can now apply these derivatives again by letting the loop shrink to a point xz, by letting delta x and delta z tend to 0, or excuse me, delta y. And so when we do that, this is the basic form of the derivative. And so this gives us finally the partial of the magnetic field with respect to z is equal to our total current minus the time derivative of our displacement current. Again, so this is Ampere's law in differential form. again, for this very specific case only. We'll look at the general form next slide. So as I mentioned, we can now extend this to a more general case with multiple components in x, y, and z that are all time dependent. And we can also make use of the del operator that we talked about before in the last lecture. And so if we make use of that, we can simplify our notation so that Ampere's law in differential form looks like this. And so the way we would say this then is the curl of the magnetic field intensity vector is equal to the current density vector plus the displacement vector derivative with respect to time. So in other words, this magnetic field at a point can be quantified by the addition of the two current vectors. Again, where the quantity delta derivative of d with respect to t is known as the displacement current density. So let's look at some examples. First example, we're given an E field defined by E naught Z sine omega t in the x direction. So this is a sinusoidal electric field. And it's told to us then that the current density is 0 through a certain area, or surface area, and that the magnetic field only has a y component. So in other words, we've only got B, or magnetic flux density sub y. And so they want us to find that. So from Ampere's law, then, again for this specific case, we have the partial of the magnetic field with respect to z is equal to the current density times the time derivative of the displacement vector density. So if we plug these in, we were told that j is 0, so we get a 0 here. Then we take the partial. Remember, we can go back and forth between the electric field and the current field displacement current density d, E and d, by multiplying or dividing by the permittivity. That says E naught. So that's how we get this expression for d. It's really E, this is our original E field expression, and multiplied by the permittivity here. So that gives us, by definition, the displacement current. And so when we take that time derivative, it just switches our sign, and our negative sign to positive sign, and then our sine function to the cosine function. So now we know that h sub y, this side, is equal to the integral of both sides with respect to z. So now we integrate this guy with respect to z. And when we do, the result we get is negative E naught omega E naught cosine omega t, which is basically where we started, but now we have this z squared over 2 term that's added in there. So therefore, if we get back to our magnetic flux density, remember that B and H are related by the permittivity, much like E and D are related by the permeability by the permittivity. So if we just multiply this times mu naught, then this will give us an expression for our By term, which is what we were looking for to begin with. It's worth noting here then that an electric field that's varying linearly with Z will give rise to a magnetic field proportional to Z squared. So that's pretty interesting to note that as we move further down the Z axis, our magnetic field will increase by Z squared over 2. We'll talk about that more later. So now we want to look at an Ampere's law example. So we're given a current distribution of J, which is just J naught in the x direction. And this is only defined from a constant negative A along Z to positive A, and as illustrated to the right here, so this will look like this. So we go from negative A to positive A. Along the z-axis, we have this current density in the x direction. How do you read this? And again, J naught is a constant, so it's just this constant current density in that gap there. So we're asked to find the magnetic field everywhere. So to do that, let's consider this current distribution here. So since the current density is independent of x and y, the resulting field is also independent of x and y. Likewise, since the current density is independent of time, the resulting field is static. So we should get a static field. So hence, our partial, using Ampere's law, our partial derivative of the magnetic field with respect to time should just equal to this current density. So restating that and working from there, if we integrate both sides with respect to z, we have this notation here, and here our limits of integration are. We're going from negative infinity to z. So as we move along the z-axis, this will integrate that. And we have to keep in mind that we will have this c, which is the constant of integration. You know, we can't just arbitrarily throw that away, as we were taught in calculus. Many times it does come out to be 0, but that's not always the case. So now we have this field again. So the variation of Jx with z is illustrated here. So remember, we have this current density that's just defined from negative a to a, and so it's just this constant value here. When you get outside of a, then you don't see any current. So if we integrate Jx with respect to z, it's simply finding the area under the curve as a function of z and then taking its negative, because we have this negative sign up here. So one additional constraint that we have then is that from symmetry, the field must be equal and opposite on either side of this region. So, you know, as we're approaching this current field, we'll have one magnetic field, but conservation of energy says that once we go outside of it, we should have the negative equal opposite of that. So hence the C value must be chosen in such a way to accomplish this. And one way we can do that is by letting the C term equal to J naught A, as illustrated here. So you can see that the constant term, at least in this region here, is J naught A. So as we go down, when A 0, the field 0, so on and so forth. So the magnetic field intensity then can be expressed by the above calculation, but I think a better way to understand is to break it up into parts. And so when we do that, we'll say that the magnetic field is constant outside of our region, right? So from negative A in this direction, where Z is always less than that, it's just J naught A in the Y direction. And same thing for this bottom one. Once we get outside the region on this side, it's negative J naught A, so it's moving in this direction, and then in between we'll have negative J naught Z AY, so it varies with Z, so as Z 0, it's 0, and then when we get to these two endpoints, it creates that point of continuity there. So we just need to remember now that the magnetic flux density is the magnetic field intensity multiplied by the permeability. And so we can go back and forth between those with this graph. It's just a scalar shift.